Yes, welcome friends to this new session. In this session, we are going to talk about globalization and we would understand what it means and then the different aspects of globalization. Basically, globalization is a word which in today's world is used to describe the increasing interdependence of the world's cultures, the economies, the populations, and that is a consequence of cross-border trade in goods and services and technology and flows of investment, even flows of people and also flow of information. So countries of the world have built economic partnerships to facilitate these movements over centuries. So something like globalization has been happening in the world for centuries, but the term basically, which you call as globalization, it gained popularity mainly after the end of the Cold War in the early 90s. Although you can see very strong trends towards globalization after the 1960s, but the usage of this term in academic discourse started very strongly only after the 1990s as we saw these cooperative arrangements which shaped the modern everyday life of people. One of the effects was that it promoted the increased interactions between different regions and people living in different parts of the world. When we look at the effects of globalization, they are quite complex and they are even politically charged. And as it happens with major technological advances, globalization basically claims to benefit the society as a whole. However, when any phenomena benefits some people, it has to be at the cost of some others. So obviously, there are certain groups which are at a distinct disadvantage as a consequence of this process of globalization. So understandably, the relative costs and the relative benefits need to be properly understood by us. Now, as this process of globalization got so, popular in the world slowly and gradually, and with time, it became so popular that it slowly and gradually became or was elevated to the level of global common sense. Now, it is important for us to understand that how an idea becomes global common sense and what is the importance of an idea or how the importance of an idea changes once it becomes global common sense. Now, global common sense is an idea which is globally accepted as part of common sense. Now, when an idea becomes common sense, it means that this idea goes out of discussion. There is no debate on that idea. And people accept that idea uncritically. So, one can just imagine the advantages with people who create an idea, who configure an idea, when their idea becomes common sense, means it goes beyond debate. And once an idea becomes global common sense, it goes out of debate at the global level. And the advantage is that then nobody questions or nobody looks at that idea critically. And exactly that has happened with globalization. That slowly and gradually it has reached to the level of global common sense. People in the world accept globalization uncritically. Because if one were to go and question, that why a country should globalize, people will say that maybe they don't understand, what it is. Because it is something which is inevitable, which is very logical for any country to go for. Because globalization is something which is there in the world and everybody has no option or any country has no option but to accept it uncritically. But a question arises that who created this idea and why this idea is so much in vogue, in usage in the present world. Now, we all know that this is an idea which came from the West, from the Western world, Although the phenomena, as we already mentioned, has been there for a long time, but this term, the coinage of the term, is of Western origin. And the West has advertised and glamorized this idea so much that it has become so very attractive. And it has been projected as the panacea of all the ills of modern world. So whatever be the problems of any country, there is only one solution, and the solution is globalization. So the inevitability of globalization and the complete usefulness of globalization for all countries is what stares us in the face in today's world. And the framers of this idea, have deliberately kept the definition of globalization very loose. Had the definition been very specific and very particular, then what would have happened? That there would have been a lot of things which would have gone outside the definition. But deliberately, the framers of this concept have created this omnibus concept, which is all-inclusive. So a lot of phenomena which inform the modern world of today in which we live are incorporated within this idea of globalization. So it is all-inclusive and it includes many things which hitherto were understood by us under a different name. So for example, if we look at the different dimensions of globalization, we would know that there are several concepts which were so very popular, so much in usage at the global level, but now to understand that phenomena which that term signified, today we use the term globalization. For example, internationalization. Now, internationalization was a standard term, and it referred to the interaction, the connection among countries or nations of the world. So this increasing interconnectedness, interrelationship among and between nations of the world was defined as, or is defined as, internationalization, coming together of these nations, interacting with each other and talking to each other, trading with each other, movement of people from here and there. That is internationalization. But today, if one were to talk about that phenomena of internationalization, usually the term which is going to be used is globalization. In fact, globalization has subsumed that concept of internationalization within itself, and today, more often, to describe this phenomena of internationalization, we would be using the term globalization. Similarly, another term, deterritorialization, that is the insignificance of territories, that how increasingly territory is becoming insignificant in international politics. Means, howsoever distant you are geographically, you are close to each other in terms of communication, in terms of movement of people. It is so easy to move from one part of the world to the other. And even if you are sitting here and the other person is sitting in the other part of the world, you can talk to the person on the phone, through video calling, we can communicate through the internet, and all kinds of technologies are there. So geography or territory today is generally understood to have very little significance, or territorial distance, is not something, which is a restriction in terms of our interaction, in terms of connectedness and so on. So territory is losing its significance to a great extent. In positive matters as well as in negative matters, somebody has a deadly virus, as we saw during the corona crisis, sits in an airplane in New York, and within 16, 17 hours he lands in Delhi carrying that virus to Delhi, and it spreads here. Similarly in other parts of the world. So that territorial difference which was protecting us from that virus in the earlier times, when movement of people was not so easy, we used to hear that this communicable disease was there in some part of the world, and a lot of people died, but it was just something we heard of. We were, safe or sanitized because of our distance. But now that is not there. Similarly, weaponry, you have intercontinental ballistic missiles and other precision guided missiles and other weaponry, which can be fired from here to the other part of the world. So even if you are very distant, you can't escape the firepower which I am trying to unleash on you as a country from a significant distance. And similarly, the positive things, which we talked about. So deterritorialization was very much a phenomena in the international sphere. But for us today, it would be very rare for somebody to talk about deterritorialization to describe this kind of a phenomena in the world. We would be using the more popular and the more attractive and the more understandable term globalization. So for deterritorialization also, we would be all using the term globalization. That is the most easy and usable term. Then, for example, we have the phenomena of westernization, the imitation of the West, how you westernize, or the westernization, when people imitate the West, the lifestyle, the culture, the other things of the Western world. So westernization used to be a very common term used by academicians and others to understand how people elsewhere in the world were getting westernized in terms of their lives, lifestyles and behavior and other things. But today, if one were to talk about that phenomenon of westernization, we would generally be using the term globalization. Similarly, if we were to talk about liberalization, that is liberalization of the economy. We all understand that how economy gets liberalized, and if it is liberalized at the global level, the international economic systems of the world are liberalized. There's reduction of barriers and boundaries, and the whole world is operating as one single marketplace. So barriers are getting reduced every day increasingly, and thereby the whole world's economy is getting liberalized. So we use the term liberalization, and it is used along with privatization. Although liberalization is very much in use even today, but generally, when we need to understand that phenomenon, or when we try to give it a term, we usually get to using the term globalization. So for liberalization, also in the market sphere, in the economic systems of the world, usually the term which is used is globalization. So what I am trying to impress upon you is that there are several distinct phenomena which are interrelated in some ways, but they are different from each other. But for all these distinct phenomena, hitherto we had been having distinct terms. But now to understand that phenomena, we all would generally be using advertently and most times inadvertently the term globalization. So globalization is the in thing. It is the term in fashion. So as you have fashions in clothes, similarly you have fashions even in academics. So certain terms which were very much fashionable in the past are not in fashion now, and some new terms have come in. For example, at one time, the colonial powers in the world who were practicing colonialism and imperialism, so that colonialism was something which was a matter of pride for them. They used to pride on the number of colonies they had all around the world. The Britishers were proud that the sun never set on the British Empire. So what was that empire? It was colonies. You were colonizing people. You were doing all kinds of exploitation of the territories which you had colonized. But there was a time when that was a thing of pride. But today, if you were to ask the same colonial powers, how you look back at what you were doing, so they would say that no, colonialism is not a good thing. So nobody today talks of colonialism or imperialism as something good. All countries would usually say that we are anti-colonial, we are anti-imperialist. So the same countries which used to very proudly practice these things, today would be saying that this is something which is not good. But now, since colonialism and imperialism is not there, you have got a new term, globalization. So globalization has been glamorized, it has been made so attractive that it has nothing negative about it. It's very positive. It is something which is good for everybody. It is a solution of all your problems because it is so good, it is inherently so good, and everything good every phenomena which operates around us, as we discussed four of them, they are all subsumed within the broad omnibus definition of globalization. So that is how it has been presented and advertised and rather explained to people of the world. And that is how we understand globalization today. Finally, there is another important phenomena, and that is universalization. Now, universalization refers to the values in the world getting universal. So the idea basically is that we live in an interconnected world. The world is like a global village. We are all interconnected. So this world in which we live needs to have a similar value system, a common value system. Because that would be easier for us, when we interact with each other, when we move around, we need global, universal values. Now, this is theoretically a very attractive and good idea when you say that the whole world should have universal values, common values. But the question is that whose values are these? When you have this question that whose values are this, immediately it comes before you that these values are all Western values. So the values which are being universalized in the name of globalization are not values which are coming from the East, from the non-West. They are all Western values coming from the Western world, from the Western society, and they have to be universalized. Now the question is that, and for that, we all use the term globalization. We live in a globalized world, in a global world, and therefore there should be, the same values should be there everywhere. But the question is that why would the West want that people elsewhere have the same values as the Western world? What is the advantage? What is the benefit to them? The advantage is, the advantages are many, but one major advantage is that the West, when it tries to penetrate in different parts of the world, economically, politically, culturally, if the value system at the global level becomes uniform or similar, then it would be easier for people elsewhere in the world to accept those ideas of the West. Because they would be not very different from them. We would be having the same values as people living in the West. So since the value system is similar or same in some cases, so for us to accept Western ideas or ideas which are coming from the West becomes easier. We don't get any kind of revulsion. We don't revolt against that idea because we are very familiar with it. We are very similar to the people there in the West in terms of our values. And what are these values? Values are ideas and things which we find as acceptable, which we think that they are positive things in the society. We need to do things like this. They are part of our value system. So if the value system here is similar to the value system there, then things which come from that side, are easily acceptable to us because our mental frame is geared towards accepting those values which are coming from the other side. So earlier there would have been foreign values. Earlier there would have been values against which we would have revolted. We would not have accepted those values. But now we would be accepting those values uncritically, very easily, because they would be like our own values. So they actually are not our own values, but we have accepted them as part of this package of globalization. And therefore, slowly and gradually, we internalize these values and those values become our own values. So values coming from a different part of the world, a different cultural setting are internalized by us, and then we tend to understand that they are our own values. So universalization of values is something which is very important phenomena attached to this omnibus concept of globalization. But today, when we talk about those universal values or universalization of values, we are basically talking about them by using the term globalization, or they are part of globalization, or they are an important aspect of globalization. So now what happens that all these dimensions, which were having their own definitions, and they had their own minor and distinct categories, are now all understood under the broad category of globalization. So today, globalization is something which is accepted uncritically in the world as global common sense, as something which is useful for all the countries of the world, and all these phenomena which are there in this world, they are all understood under this broad subject, globalization. Now, although there are big claims of globalization that the whole world is becoming one and it is beneficial to all and it is rather reaching to all parts of the world, and it is creating these phenomena of internationalization, deterritorialization, liberalization, and all kinds of things. But if you look at it critically, we find that all these claims are not totally correct. For example, when we claim that globalization leads to internationalization, countries coming together, of course, in different ways countries are coming together. But there are different ways in which countries are going away from each other also. So, on the one hand, there are connections or new connections which are being formed. But on the other hand, because of different political, economic reasons, there are disconnections also, which are at work at the same time. So, on the one hand, the world is coming together. On the one hand, we are creating these linkages and the connections among and between countries of the world. But on the other hand, there are processes at work which are creating the disconnections also, which are taking countries away from each other. Obviously, because of different political, economic, strategic reasons, but that disconnection is also happening. So it's not that it is one single wave, one single phenomena which is universally visible. The converse is also visible practically at the international level. Similarly, on the one hand, we are saying that territory is becoming insignificant, borders are going down, countries are coming together, they are becoming one also, in some cases like in the European Union. But on the other hand, we see that new boundaries are being created. Countries are trying to build barriers, sometimes in the name of security, sometimes in the name of protecting themselves from refugees or other kinds of unwanted people which they don't want in their country. Sometimes they are building, cyber walls. Sometimes they are building some other kinds of barriers, to limit the flow of the goods and people and information for different reasons. So on the one hand, territory is coming down or territory is getting insignificant or territorialization is getting rather reduced. But on the other hand, territory is getting more marked. Countries are getting more conscious about their territorial borders, about the inviolability of their territorial borders, about the sanctity and sacredness of their territorial borders, and they are doing all kinds of things to build different kinds of walls to inhibit people from entering their territories or information entering their territories, sometimes weaponry entering their territories, sometimes some other cyber malware entering their territories and so on. So, on the one hand, it is deterritorialization, but on the other hand, there is territorialization also which is going on in this world, characterized by globalization. Similarly, you have liberalization in the world, that the whole world is one single marketplace, and you have free trade and everything, but we understand that at the international level there are all kinds of barriers, trade barriers, embargoes, other kinds of restrictions, duties, and all kinds of other measures, through which countries would indulge in protectionism, to protect their domestic markets. So protectionist measures are taken by smaller countries, even by bigger countries and even richer countries, and they try in every possible way to protect their domestic market and domestic industries by building these barriers. So on the one hand, the slogan goes in the name of privatization and liberalization, but on the other hand, guided by their own narrow national interests, countries would be rather building all kinds of protectionist barriers to protect their economies, because they understand that that is something which is in their economic interests. So, This is how, we are trying to create, we are witnessing, contradictory phenomena at work. On the one hand, there is universalization. Values should be universalized. For example, multiculturalism should be universalized. That was the slogan of the West. But now we are seeing even in Western countries, especially on the European continent, that a lot of people are talking in terms of monoculturalism, that our societies are, we need to be insulated, we need to be monocultural, because when other cultures come in, or people with other cultural orientations come in, they create problems for us in terms of law and order, in terms of amity in the society and other things. So that is another, issue which crops up when countries are rather talking of universal values. So on the one hand, you are promoting universal values, but on the other hand, you are trying to protect your own values against influences which come from outside. So these contradictory processes are at work. So therefore, as we understand globalization, it is a universal phenomena, it is in vogue in the world, it is very much in fashion. Countries everywhere are accepting globalization, and there are different dimensions to globalization. But on the other hand, if we look at globalization, we find that there are certain processes at work which contradict the very claims of globalization, and which are working along with those processes which globalization is trying to promote. The contradictory forces or contradictory phenomena are at work at the same time simultaneously. Thank you.